We're going to talk about establishing London as tomorrow's international tech hub. And obviously we've touched on that already with the Chancellor, but I'm really keen to get our panelists' viewpoints on this, because we know that London for many years has been a beating heart of Europe's tech scene, but obviously with Brexit there's new challenges and new issues, and I'm interested in whether the startups of tomorrow are going to continue choosing London as a tech hub, and also the established companies. How are they going to manage their workforces and the issues that they face? Just had our panelists mentioned, I'm going to kick right into it because I don't want to run out of time, so I'm going to kick right with Russ, with you first of all. Obviously you've had a big say in how London's developed as a tech hub, and you spent your time travelling the world and viewing other tech hubs. And so I'm interested in London stuck in the middle of these two giant tech hubs, Silicon Valley and the Greater Bay Area in China. And obviously it's nice being in the middle of the time zone, but I'm interested in how you see London fitting between these two giants in the future. Are we going to get squashed? How are we going to make the most of those opportunities?
Thanks, Giles. Actually, I wouldn't describe it as being stuck in the middle. I actually think that's part of our opportunity. You've got the two tech behemoths. You've got the west coast of America. You've got places like the Greater Bay Area of China. But I actually think the opportunity for London, given all the strengths that we've got going on for us, talent, investment, favorable government policy, all sitting in one city, we can also now be a huge connector to the world. And I think as London grows its tech capabilities, not only with its great fundamentals of fintech, deep tech, health tech, etc., but connecting into other tech hubs is what's going to make us stronger. We are still going to connect into Europe. We've got great connections into the US. Sherry does great work with Silicon Valley, comes to the UK. Having been to China 5 times now in the past 2 years, we're now getting on the map in China. But then you look at Africa, you look at Latin America, Middle East, India. We have great connections to all of these places, and I think that will strengthen London as a world-leading hub, in addition to London connecting into Manchester, Bristol, Belfast, Edinburgh. So that I see as the opportunity for us going forward.
There's certainly, and let's not deny there are certainly risks to this, and I think one of the risks being played out at the moment is the situation, for example, with the growing trade war between the US and China, and UK companies have to decide, I think, do they have to side with someone, or how they play this middle ground? And Joe, I want to ask you a question about this, because obviously with O2 you have a ringside seat with Huawei right now, and have you seen any knock-on effect on how this has impacted how you do business and how you see London going ahead as this sort of tech hub between these two almost warring giants at the moment?
Yeah, obviously uncertainty is unhelpful for any business, and there's quite a lot of uncertainty at the moment. In terms of the Huawei situation, we're monitoring it. We're in touch with Google and Huawei, and we want to make sure we keep our customers informed as best as possible. But beyond that, I think our focus is really how do we make sure that we're still focused on serving our customers as best we can. We still see the UK as an exciting place to invest, a growing market. We continue to invest in mobile infrastructure. I think we're investing about £2 million a day in our mobile infrastructure, and we think that's an important part of driving tech going forward.
Okay. Ronan, what do you think about that? I mean, obviously you've got to Google the same situation, perhaps a little bit direct with Huawei as well, but you're here in London, maybe slightly separated, but obviously I'm sure you have a good opinion about how you manage that issue between the US and China.
Yeah, I think I think what happens between the presidents of China and the US are above all our pay grades. We'll have to see how it plays out. At the moment, we're watching it very closely. The objective for us is to make sure that all of the customers we have around the world on Android are getting the protection and the updates that they need, and to the extent that we can work with them through the licenses that were granted by the US government. So that's kind of what we're watching. But I think, we were talking with Joe a little bit earlier on about the exciting opportunities that 5G will bring. And I think, again, coming back to the opportunity in London, we have our largest group of Android engineers outside the US based here. And making sure that London and the UK continues to be on the front foot in terms of infrastructure investment means that we're going to be able to attract the talent to build out teams like we've been building out in Google and all of the tech startups that are working in the 5G space as well.
Okay. Can we just stick with the 5G, because it's one of those topics that I'm interested to see how London's going to make the most of it. Are you worried right now, Ronan, about London falling behind slightly in 5G? Do you think we're doing enough to develop that technology? Because it's something that we all promise, and then perhaps all these promises slightly under-deliver. So I'm interested in your thoughts on that.
I can't remember who it was that said that we overestimate in the short term and underestimate in the long term, and I'm certainly in that mind space. Listen, every country around the world is racing at the moment to get this stuff out. At the same time, everybody who is in charge of deploying is worried about the capital investment and when is it going to start paying back. So there's a lot of work I think we all have to do collectively, both in terms of deploying the infrastructure and figuring out the services. That's a great opportunity for us here in the UK.
Okay. I might go back to 5G, but Sherry, I want to ask you somewhere where I think the UK is playing something of a leading role, and that's about ethics. And no one's really sort of grabbing the mantle about making sure ethics and tech are aligned, I think, in terms of all the different regions. The EU is obviously trying to play this role, and this is no disrespect to the EU, things take quite a lot of time to do anything in the EU. I mean, it's hard enough to leave it, isn't it? So making sure that you can work out AI ethics, for example, and a good framework is very difficult, but obviously you've got a keen interest in this. And do you think London is missing opportunity, or do you think it's going to make the most of this opportunity?
I think London's going to make the most of the opportunity around AI and ethics. There are, and because it's so important and having a framework of thinking about it, there are dozens of competing at the moment ethics frameworks. And I think one of the things that we can do and we are doing is working hard to be the hub of all of that and bringing people together. I mean, sort of yesterday and today at COGEX, bringing together the leading talents around AI and ethics is going to allow us to adopt a standard that is acceptable to everyone. And I think huge progress has probably been made in the last 24, 48 hours on that alone. What I like about having an ethical framework is it allows us to know how we train our employees. It allows us to know how we've got, I think about the 500,000 teachers who are instructing our 7.2 million young people, and having a framework so that they can think through it and make ethical decisions and be informed is super important. And without a framework, you can't actually ensure the quality. And as a startup and as somebody who uses AI, knowing that there's a framework in place and the rules aren't going to change every 5 minutes is super important. And to the extent that they're flitting around in other countries, that is and should remain a competitive advantage for us so that we can start up things and, more importantly, scale them up because we know that we don't have shifting sand under our feet.
But I'm interested in how are we going to train employees and also people younger, for example, at schools. Like, when do you start? Because, I mean, I've covered technology for just over 2 years now, and I know that I have reporters who think that I know nothing about AI, right? And I think I know a little bit about AI, but compared to a large workforce and also below that, kids, maybe university students, like, well, where do you start educating people and how do you make sure they know enough about AI to make good decisions when it comes to the ethics of the companies they work for and the decisions they make are right or wrong?
Earlier today, you had a screen up showing what was hampering AI, and everybody said it was the skills. So we need to focus on that with teachers. We need to focus on it with students, university students, and secondary students, and primary. I'm going from here up to COGEX to judge a competition called Teens in AI, where they have been hacking all around the country. They've been hacking using open data to create around the Sustainable Development Goals. And one of the ways that we can do that is through competitions. If I think about Raspberry Pi and our two investments in Coder Dojo and Code Club, there are 1 million children every single week in after-school clubs, and they are using an understanding about AI and the frameworks, and that's really important. Also, for the educators, I think big companies can do a lot by encouraging your employees to help out. This is an absolute crisis, and those of us who are fortunate to have those rare resources should share them as generously as you possibly can. We've got the dream at Workfinder of having 100 hours of work experience for every child. Obviously, they need that experience in tech companies. expertise so that they go up the learning curve. And we all need to work together as a community. We can't turn to one stakeholder or another stakeholder and say, it's all up to you. Because it's not, it's up to all of us. And we've never seen, I worked on the AI work with the Royal Society, which is, again, thinking about this, how do we make sure that all universities can make sure that they're educated? We need universities on this, we need all of the informal startups that are helping on AI, we need all of the startups and all of the large companies. And if we act together, then we will solve the problem. I think the McKinsey lady Claire earlier was talking about a 20% boost to the GDP if we could grasp this opportunity within just a couple of years. Well, let's grasp it. We don't have to wait for anything.
Okay. And Ronan, it would be remiss of me as a journalist not to ask you about Google and AI and ethics, because you've been in the news quite a bit recently about this topic. But I'm kind of interested in keeping it on a London focus. And obviously there's a lot of tension between big tech and their employees and how the executives and some of the employees define ethics in AI. So in your company, are employees coming to you and saying this is something we need to worry about? And what are their concerns? And has it changed over the past few years?
So I think as we do all of the research in these fields, and again, it's super exciting, I think, that between London and the big universities in the UK, we have world-leading status when it comes to the development, right at the cutting edge. I think when some of the biggest problems in AI get solved, they're going to get solved in a very short distance from here. But as we are learning more and more about these technologies, we're recognizing that they need to have rules of the road put in place, and making sure that we have those conversations in public, that we have it with a broad range of society, with experts from lots of different domains, to explore and think through, well, what could be the downfalls and how do we avoid them before they happen? And we know that the innovation is happening at a huge pace, and we know that the disruption will come very, very quickly, so we need to be ready. I think the work that the government has done with the Centre for Data Ethics in AI is a massive step forward. We've been party to a number of industry coalitions exploring the field of ethics in AI, and we came out last year and published our own principles in AI, so the 10 principles around what we wanted AI to accomplish, but also very explicitly the principles of things that we will not work with in AI, and particularly when it comes to military applications. So yes, a lot of that did come from conversations with our employees. It's the sort of open culture that we have, and these are the folks who are on the bleeding edge of some of this research, so we listen very carefully to what they're telling.
Okay. I'm going to open up now to the audience, and we'll do our audience poll. So just to remind you, it's Bloomberg, STYT.com, but hopefully you should have that ready now. And I think the poll is very general, but I'm still interested in obviously what you think. It's how do you feel about London standing as a tech hub today? Optimistic, neutral, or pessimistic?
And the answer is...
Are we going to have any pessimists? Oh, yes, we've got some pessimists. But I think it's good to see we've got a lot of optimists, and I think I'm sitting with 4 optimists. So I'm not going to let you answer that question, but I'm going to answer it a little bit differently. And yeah, maybe Russ, you can start. I'm interested in everyone's opinion. How has your optimism changed as we've got closer, maybe closer to Brexit? Think back 2 years. What did you feel like then compared to how you feel now?
Yeah, I think overall still optimistic, although we still don't have the big answer resolved around what does Brexit look like, and that obviously has created a high degree of uncertainty. I think obviously many people want to get on with it and know what that looks like. I think if you look at the past 3 years in terms of what's happened in London, the level of investment, the number of tech unicorns being created, the sense of community that I see in London's tech sector, and this emergence of many different tech verticals, is pause for optimism, and we should really be celebrating that. I think if you look out on the horizon, what worries me is the talent side, and I know that that's come up a couple of times today. Both, how do we move faster to develop and nurture the homegrown talent that we desperately are going to need? And maybe if there's one good thing I've seen coming out of these Brexit discussions is I see companies, both large and small, doubling down on having to develop and train their staffs and their employees. And I think that's been a really positive thing. I also think we have to just look at the overseas talent side of this equation. Why has London tech been so successful? Well, 1 in 3 London tech workers is from overseas. And the past 3 years, they've been getting some negative signals about their being welcomed here. And I think we have to work extra hard to counter that. We have to work very hard on our immigration policy. I know Tech London advocates, we've been campaigning a lot around the Tier 1 visa, getting the cap on Tier 2 visas lifted. We need to get the Tier 4 overseas student visas amended so that overseas students can stay longer here. All of those folks play a hugely important role in our ecosystem. So for me, some of those people are less optimistic because they don't see the clarity yet. So from where I sit, if we can really focus on the talent piece and a lot of what we've already been talking about and the great work that people like Sherry is doing, I think we're going to be in an even better place, but it's going to take a lot of extra effort to do that.
Okay. I'm interested in your thoughts there, Joe, just carry on that talent theme. Have you struggled at all to hire people because of Brexit?
I don't think we've seen a big difference from a talent point of view. Telecommunications is inherently a national business by the way that the regulations are set up. And we also have the benefit of having offices across the country. So we're not just competing for talent in London, but also working with people up north as well. And I think actually that's one of the things that's important as we think about London as a tech centre of the world. How do we also extend that beyond London into the rest of the country? But finding and retaining the right diverse talent, particularly with those tech skills, continues to be something that I think all companies struggle with to some extent.
Yeah. I mean, let's stay with that diverse thing, because we've got some interesting questions coming in from the audience, and I kind of wrap some of them into one, but it's the same topic. But do you think that London fails to fully leverage the diversity in the tech industry? And there's a few questions on that theme, and I think it's a great question because we talk the talk, but sometimes, and you see with many panels on the boards of companies, the boards of VCs, we fall very, very short in achieving what perhaps we should do. Like, Joe, sit with you and we can pass it around. Do you think that the companies are doing enough? And if the answer is no, then how quickly do you want people to change and how?
It's a great question, and I'm actually the executive sponsor for diversity and inclusion at O2, so it's a topic very close to my heart. I think we definitely have much further to go. Equally, we are seeing progress. And for us, it's about how do we make sure that people from all backgrounds have access to capital and the support that they need. We actually run as Telefonica an accelerator program called WIRA. And the WIRA UK team have actually done a great job of attracting a really diverse set of founders. And I'll forget the exact stats, but I think something like 45% of the founding teams going through that program are female. They've also got great BAME representation. And it's making sure that all of the organizations represented here and others continue doing what is needed to make sure that we're able to level the playing field and that people are able to access capital and support based on the merit of their ideas rather than anything else.
And just on that, we, and this is Workfinder, we on Monday launched with WIRA a campaign to get the people who had benefited from WIRA's acceleration to host work experience placements for all up and down the country. And in less than 100 hours, we had more than 50% of your accelerators sign up to host work experience, which means that they will be providing examples. The work experience also was from the charities that you work with who are BAME. And if we can start providing role models, all of us, and giving really meaningful projects so that they can taste the fruits of our, the tech world, that's a really great thing. The work that we looked into is how deep the skills crisis was. We've seen an 8,000% increase in the last 3 years in some skill sets, in demand for some skill sets. So 8,000 is a lot. So we really need to not just 10x, but probably 100x our efforts so that we can right this sort of this friction that we feel at the moment as industries are really, really quickly restructuring as the flood of this data and the lagging behind of the classic incumbent organizations that usually educate people quite well at not quite realizing how fast the demand change for technical skills and AI skills and digital skills was. But we need to make sure that talent has what it is, and working together with large companies and small together is great. And I love what you've done with your accelerator. I think it's it's very exemplary.
I'm going to be a bit controversial, so notwithstanding the great work that's being mentioned here, we are not doing a good job at addressing the diversity issue, a sector that is 80% white male is not sustainable for the longer term. We're not going to build world-leading products and services unless we have diverse companies, diverse boards, diverse management teams. I do see some really great initiatives at a grassroots level. I know Mark Martin, who runs UK Black Tech, is here. People like that do a phenomenal job trying to bring blacks, minorities, more women into the sector, but we are a long way off. So we have to come out of our bubble and make sure that we're going out there and taking a look and saying, how can we touch lots of people out there who just say the tech sector is not for them. They don't see a career in it for them. It doesn't feel comfortable to come into the tech sector. So we, all of us, have to work so incredibly hard to make that change in the next few years. Otherwise, I don't see London, I don't see the UK as a world-leading tech sector.
But I think role models are really important in that, getting out, highlighting them, celebrating them.
Yes.
That will encourage lots of people. I never thought of being an entrepreneur until I moved to London.
Yes.
London actually absolutely made me one, and it was female role models that made me think, I maybe could do that.
Yes.
So I think that
and we need to clone people like you.
We need to clone, we need to 100x, 1,000x.
Yes.
And that, well, 1,000x, that probably wouldn't be enough.
1,000, sorry.
But it's a great thing. I love and have thrived on being a woman in tech. I think it is the most fabulous industry. It's provided me with flexibility in all sorts of ways to navigate being a woman, being a mother, and being a bit of a nerd.
And we have benefited from your leadership.
Well,
but how do we move that from 18, 19, 20% to 30%, to 40%? What can we do? And how do we push companies, the O2s, the Googles? I know you're doing great work. How do we really work harder? Do we need to set targets? Do we need to put quotas in place? I know it's controversial, but I think we have to move this needle. Otherwise, we're kidding ourselves.
There's an important role here for government in all of this. It was great to see the Prime Minister's announcement earlier in the week of the investment to fund 2,500 masters to educate themselves in higher level AI, and that 1,000 of those places would be for diversity candidates. Yes. So I think that's amazing. But we've got to go back right to the very beginning of the funnel, and we've got to make sure that we are increasing and not decreasing the number of kids that are going into the STEM subjects. We're going in the wrong direction right now. We need to figure that out. And I'm not an expert in the field, but that is an urgent concern from my perspective. I think the other part of it, we often get lost in the conversation around talent at the top end, who's going to come and do the programming. I think for a vibrant tech hub, we also need to make sure that there's a vibrant market of consumers and businesses who are ready to receive the products and the innovations that are being produced. And therefore, making sure that digital skills and that companies have the capacities in their workforces to take on these new products, to transform their ways of working, is something that's a real gap in the UK at the moment as well. We've been doing work through Digital Garage. We've trained 300,000 people in the last few years. Many companies are doing these things as well. But again, I think it's an area where government could probably accelerate the efforts of the individual companies and pull them under an umbrella and really put it as a priority for the next number of years to make sure that every citizen feels comfortable living a life in a digital space, and that every company feels like they've got access to the training and to the skills and to the workforce that's flexible enough to adopt these new technologies and disruptions as they come.
How many apprentices, for example, are Google hiring in London? Like how many apprenticeships, how many people who don't have qualifications? Because we saw Facebook come out with an announcement today, 500 people in London, 100 of them in AI. I'm sure the experience needed on that CV is going to be ridiculous, but what about the other end of the scale?
Yeah, so we've got a number of different programs, and I'll tell you the one that I've been focused on within the kind of business and marketing side of the house, which was, we've been running an apprentice program for a number of years. It was reasonably successful. We were getting great candidates coming through, but we really, again, wanted to go back and repurpose it to focus on the diversity challenge. We've partnered with White Hat, and we're now in our second cohort. We've got 50 or 60 new apprentices that have just come into the business. We're putting them on a program which, when they come out, they will have an option. They will have a diploma. We have partners in the industry who are now replicating this program, and we've got an ambition to grow this to across the digital advertising sector to a couple of hundred apprentices between us and our partners each year. So that's in its early stages. We've gotten up to the first 100, but watch this space for more. We're also doing a lot in the computer science field. So through our engineering department, we're sponsoring scholarships in computer science. We're a partnership with the Ada Lovelace College to bring people from non-traditional backgrounds into computer science and AI, and we're also sponsoring PhD candidates to go through that as well. So we're attacking from multiple strands.
I'm running out of time, so I'll be very quick, actually. One gap we've had is that obviously Google is hiring a huge amount, so is Facebook, so are lots of big tech companies. When are we going to see Alibaba or Tencent come to London and build an office the size of Google's or Facebook's? Has anyone got?
I think it's coming. I mean, Alibaba is here. Baidu is setting up here. So, having been out there, they're very, very interested in what's going on here. I've been on a number of delegations to go to Shanghai. We launched Tech Shenzhen Advocates in March. There's a growing interest now, and given the macro climate, we talked about Huawei earlier, given the U.S. government's position on China at the moment, they're looking around and saying, where can we go? And we're kind of saying, come here. Come expand here, work with us here. And there are great organizations that are here on the ground level that can really help us connect between London tech and what's going on across China. We also have to spend time helping them to understand how business gets done here, that things operate very differently here from the way they operate in China. So they have to be mindful of that and respect that. And so the more collaboration we can get with the Baidus, the Alibabas, and the Tencents, and that will then spread, I think, to another whole tier of organizations. I mean, the number of cities that come here from China to explore and see what's going on, I don't know how many delegations I've met over the past year. We're on the radar, which is great. Now we've got to work with them to translate that into specific action and expansion.
Okay. And just lastly, one more question from the audience, and it's a fair one. Why London and not the regions? I grew up on a farm in Somerset, so you're preaching to the choir here. Like, why? What's the risk? Like, anyone can answer. Maybe Joe, you've got to obviously be interested in your point of view here. Like, what's the risk of being too top-heavy on London?
And I would fully agree with the sentiment behind that question. And London's obviously an important hub, but it's also about how do we reach out into the rest of the country. So it's a great progression that Tech City has now become Tech Nation. From our Wira point of view, for example, we've got accelerator hubs across the country, leveraging those areas of expertise. So, for example, our AI and blockchain accelerator is in Edinburgh with the university there. We've got one in Milton Keynes, one in Gloucestershire. And so I think figuring out how we build not only the tech ecosystem in London, but also across the rest of the country is really important. And as a mobile operator, we're providing a key part of the infrastructure required for that and making sure that we play our part in doing that.
Okay. Well, thank you very much for your time. I've run out of time, unfortunately. So thank you very much to my panelists, and thank you for the audience for listening, and thanks for your questions.
Thank you. Thank you, Giles.